There comes a time in every person's life when the weight of the world feels too heavy to carry. You've prayed, you've tried, you've worked tirelessly, and yet the mountains before you seem immovable. The doors you've knocked on remain closed. The relationships you've poured your heart into still remain broken. The dreams you've envisioned still seem far away, as if the universe itself has conspired to test your patience. And in that moment when exhaustion meets despair, a choice stands before you. Will you keep clenching your hands, holding on to what you think you can control, or will you finally release it and let God step in? The title of today's message is simple but profound: Let go and let God handle the impossible. Notice the power in those words. There is a divine invitation here, an assurance that there are things too heavy, too complicated, too miraculous for human hands to solve, but nothing is too big for God. This sermon is about releasing the burden of impossibility and allowing the Almighty to take over the battles you cannot fight alone. When we talk about releasing the burden of control, we're touching one of the deepest struggles of the human heart. Control makes us feel safe. It convinces us that if we plan enough, worry enough, or work hard enough, we can prevent pain, failure, or disappointment. We grip situations tightly because we are afraid of what might happen if we let go. We hold on to relationships that are draining us, to problems that are beyond our capacity, and to outcomes that we cannot dictate. Over time, this constant need to control becomes a heavy burden, one that quietly steals our peace, our joy, and even our faith. Life has a way of exposing the limits of human control. No matter how intelligent, disciplined, or strong you are, there will always be moments when circumstances move beyond your ability to manage them. Health issues appear without warning. Financial situations shift unexpectedly. People change, plans fall apart, and doors close that you desperately want to stay open. These moments are not punishments, they are invitations. They invite you to recognize that you were never meant to be the ultimate authority over your life. You were created to trust, not to carry everything alone. Releasing control does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you stop trying or become passive. It means you acknowledge that there are certain battles you cannot win with human strength alone. It means you stop exhausting yourself by trying to play the role of God. When you insist on controlling everything, you quietly tell yourself that the outcome depends entirely on you. That belief creates pressure, anxiety, and fear. But when you let go, you shift that weight onto God where it belongs. Many people resist letting go because they confuse surrender with weakness. In reality, surrender is one of the strongest spiritual acts a person can make. It takes courage to admit, I cannot fix this. It takes humility to say, I don't have all the answers. And it takes faith to trust that God does. Letting go is not giving up. It is giving over. It is choosing to trust God's wisdom over your own understanding and his power over your limitations. Control often comes from fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being disappointed again. We think that if we hold on tightly enough, we can protect ourselves. But control does not eliminate fear, it feeds it. The more you try to manage everything, the more anxious you become, because deep down you know that control is an illusion. Life is unpredictable, but God is not. Peace does not come from controlling outcomes. It comes from trusting the one who holds all outcomes in his hands. When you release control, something powerful happens inside you. Your mind begins to rest. Your heart begins to breathe again. You stop replaying worst-case scenarios and start living in trust. You realize that God is not intimidated by the complexity of your situation. What overwhelms you does not overwhelm him. What confuses you does not confuse him. What feels impossible to you is simply another opportunity for him to reveal his power. There is also freedom in letting go because it breaks the cycle of constant striving. Many people live in survival mode, always pushing, forcing, and chasing outcomes. They are tired not because they are lazy, but because they are carrying burdens they were never meant to carry. When you release control, you give yourself permission to rest in God's care. Rest does not mean inactivity. It means trusting that God is working even when you cannot see immediate results. Releasing control also opens the door for God to work in ways you never expected. Often we block miracles because we're too focused on how we think things should happen. We create rigid plans and timelines, and when God's way looks different, we resist it. Letting go allows God to move creatively, to open doors you never considered, and to bring solutions that are better than anything you could have planned. God's plans are not limited by your imagination. This process is not always instant. Letting go is often a daily decision. Some days you release control, and the next day you find yourself trying to grab it back. That's okay. Growth is not about perfection, it's about persistence. Each time you choose to trust God instead of controlling the outcome, your faith grows stronger. Over time, you begin to live with a deeper sense of peace, knowing that you are supported by a power far greater than yourself. At its core, releasing the burden of control is about relationship. It is about trusting God, not just with the big picture, but with the details of your life. It is believing that He cares, that He sees you, and that He is faithful. When you finally loosen your grip and place your life in His hands, you discover a truth that changes everything. You were never meant to carry the impossible. God was. Faith is the bridge that connects human limitation to divine possibility. Without faith, the impossible remains a wall, intimidating, unmovable, and overwhelming. With faith, that same wall becomes a doorway through which God's power is revealed. Faith does not deny reality. It simply refuses to let reality have the final word. It looks at the facts, acknowledges the difficulty, and still believes that God is greater than what the eyes can see and the mind can comprehend. Many people misunderstand faith as blind optimism or positive thinking. True faith is much deeper than that. It is not pretending that problems do not exist or convincing yourself that everything will magically work out without trust in God. Faith is a confident reliance on God's character. It is believing that He is faithful, powerful, and good, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. When faith becomes your foundation, impossibility loses its authority over your heart. Impossibility often shows up when human resources run out. You may have done everything you know to do, sought advice, worked hard, prayed, and waited, yet nothing seems to change. This is where faith becomes essential. Faith steps in when logic reaches its limit. It whispers hope when the situation screams defeat. It dares to believe that God can make a way where there seems to be none. Faith does not always eliminate fear, but it gives you the strength to move forward despite it. You may still feel uncertainty, but faith keeps you anchored. It reminds you that God's track record is perfect, even if your past experiences have been painful. Every miracle in Scripture began with a moment of faith, someone choosing to believe beyond what was reasonable or expected. Faith always precedes the manifestation of God's power. One of the greatest challenges in walking by faith is timing. We want immediate results, quick answers, and visible change. Faith, however, teaches patience. It trusts that God is working even when nothing seems to be happening. It understands that delay does not mean abandonment. God's silence is not His absence. Often He is preparing the circumstances, aligning people, and strengthening your character before revealing the breakthrough. Faith also requires surrender of understanding. There will be moments when God's ways do not make sense to you. The path He chooses may look illogical, uncomfortable, or even risky. Faith does not demand explanations. It demands trust. It says, even if I don't understand how this will work, I believe that God knows what He is doing. This kind of faith shifts your focus from the problem to the promise. Impossibility becomes less intimidating when you realize that God specializes in it. The impossible is not an obstacle to Him. It is an opportunity to reveal His glory. Faith allows you to see impossibility not as a dead end, but as the starting point for God's intervention. When you trust God with what you cannot do, you make room for Him to do what only He can. Faith grows through experience. Each time you trust God and see Him come through, your confidence in Him deepens. What once seemed impossible becomes a testimony, and that testimony fuels your faith for future challenges. Over time, you begin to approach difficulties differently, not with panic or despair, but with expectation. You know that even if the situation looks bleak, God is still in control. It is important to remember that faith is not about the size of your belief, but the object of it. You don't need perfect faith. You need faith in a perfect God. Even small faith, when placed in Him, carries tremendous power. God is not moved by how confident you feel, but by your willingness to trust Him despite your doubts. When faith becomes the bridge between you and the impossible, you stop measuring your life by your own abilities. You stop limiting your expectations to what seems realistic. Instead, you begin to live with hope, courage, and anticipation. Faith changes how you see the future. It lifts your eyes above the problem and fixes them on the one who holds the solution. Ultimately, faith is a choice you make every day. It is choosing to believe that God is able, even when the outcome is uncertain. It is choosing trust over fear, hope over despair, and belief over doubt. When you walk by faith, the impossible no longer defines your limits. It becomes the space where God's power is most clearly revealed. Courage is often mistaken for the absence of fear, but true courage is the decision to move forward even when fear is present. When it comes to surrendering control to God, courage becomes essential because letting go challenges our deepest instincts. We are naturally wired to protect ourselves, to secure outcomes, and to minimize risk. Surrender asks us to do the opposite. It asks us to trust God in moments where certainty is unavailable and clarity feels distant. This is not an easy step, but it is a necessary one for anyone who wants to experience the power of God in their life. Surrender feels risky because it removes the illusion of control. When you release something into God's hands, you no longer dictate how it will unfold or when it will be resolved. This uncertainty can be uncomfortable, especially if you've been hurt before or disappointed by unmet expectations. Courage and surrender is choosing faith over fear, believing that God's intentions are good even when the outcome is unknown. It is trusting his heart when you cannot trace his hand. Many people hesitate to surrender because they fear losing what they're holding on to. They worry that if they let go, everything will fall apart. In reality, the opposite is often true. What falls apart is not your life, but your false sense of security. Courage allows you to see that God is not waiting for you to fail. He is waiting for you to trust him. When you surrender, you are not stepping into chaos, but into divine order. Surrender requires humility. It means admitting that you do not have all the answers and that your strength has limits. This admission can be difficult, especially in a world that celebrates self-reliance and independence. Yet spiritual growth begins where pride ends. Courageous surrender is the willingness to say, God, I need you. I cannot do this on my own. That prayer is not a sign of weakness. It is an invitation for God's power to be displayed in your life. There is also courage in waiting. Often, surrender does not lead to immediate results. God may ask you to trust him through seasons of silence, uncertainty, or delay. Waiting can be one of the hardest forms of surrender because it forces you to rely on God without visible evidence. Courage in these moments means resisting the urge to take control back, to rush the process, or to settle for less than what God has promised. It means standing firm in faith, even when nothing seems to be happening. Surrendering to God also requires courage to release expectations. We often surrender situations, but still hold on to specific outcomes. True surrender means trusting God not only with the problem, but with the solution. It means allowing him to work in ways that may differ from your plans or preferences. Courage is letting go of how you think things should happen and trusting that God's way is better, even if it surprises you. Another aspect of courage and surrender is vulnerability. Letting go exposes your heart. It means opening yourself to hope again, even after disappointment. Many people avoid surrender because they fear being hurt if things don't turn out as expected. Courage is choosing to believe that God is worth trusting, even when the risk feels real. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is the doorway to authentic faith and deeper connection with God. Over time, courageous surrender builds spiritual strength. Each time you choose to trust God instead of controlling the outcome, your confidence in him grows. You begin to see patterns of faithfulness in your life. You realize that God has carried you through situations you once thought were impossible. This history of trust becomes a foundation that supports you during future challenges. Courage to surrender also transforms how you view challenges. Instead of seeing them as threats, you begin to see them as opportunities for growth and divine intervention. You stop asking, what if this goes wrong? And start asking, what if God is about to do something incredible? This shift in perspective changes how you experience life. Fear loses its grip and faith takes its place. In the end, surrender is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. Every day presents new opportunities to trust God or to take control back. Courage is choosing surrender again and again, even when it feels uncomfortable. It is believing that God's hands are safer than your own and that his plans are greater than anything you could create. When you embrace the courage to surrender, you discover a deeper level of peace. You realize that you are not responsible for carrying the weight of the impossible. God is. And as you release control, you step into a life marked not by fear, but by trust, confidence, and a growing awareness of God's presence in every situation. Prayer becomes truly powerful when it is understood not as a last resort, but as an act of release. Many people pray while still holding tightly to their worries, fears, and plans. They speak words to God, yet internally they remain in control, replaying scenarios and calculating outcomes. Prayer, in its deepest form, is not about informing God of your problems. He already knows them. It is about transferring the weight of those problems from your heart into his hands. When prayer becomes a tool of release, it transforms not only the situation, but the person praying. At the core of releasing through prayer is honesty. God is not impressed by polished words or rehearsed phrases. He responds to a sincere heart. When you come to him and admit your limitations, your exhaustion, and your confusion, something shifts within you, saying, I cannot fix this, is often the first step toward real freedom. It breaks the cycle of self-reliance and opens the door for divine intervention. Prayer invites God into spaces you can no longer manage on your own. Many people struggle with prayer because they expect immediate results. When answers do not come quickly, frustration sets in and doubt follows. But prayer is not a transaction, it is a relationship. Its power lies not only in changing circumstances, but in changing perspective. As you pray, your heart begins to align with God's will. Fear loses its grip, clarity replaces confusion, and peace settles in even before the situation changes. This inner shift is often the first sign that God is already at work. Prayer as release also requires trust. When you pray and truly surrender, you are saying, God, I trust you with the outcome. This can be difficult because it means letting go of specific expectations. You may want healing to come a certain way, provision to arrive on your timeline, or relationships to be restored according to your plan. Releasing through prayer means trusting God not only with the problem, but with the solution. It means believing that his wisdom exceeds your understanding. There is power in simple prayers of surrender. Long, elaborate prayers are not necessary to release burdens. Sometimes the most powerful prayer is a quiet whisper, Lord, I give this to you. In that moment, you are acknowledging that God's strength is greater than your own. You are choosing faith over anxiety and trust over control. These moments of surrender, repeated over time, build a deep sense of spiritual stability. Prayer also creates space for God to speak. When you release why our worries, you make room for divine guidance. Often answers come not as dramatic signs, but as gentle impressions, renewed clarity, or unexpected peace. Prayer tunes your heart to God's voice, helping you discern when to act and when to wait. It teaches you to rely on his direction rather than your impulses. Releasing through prayer does not mean you stop thinking about your situation. It means you stop obsessing over it. There is a difference between responsibility and rumination. Prayer helps you place boundaries around your thoughts, preventing them from spiraling into anxiety. Each time worry arises, prayer becomes a reminder to release again. This repeated act of surrender trains your heart to trust God more deeply. Prayer also strengthens resilience. When you consistently bring your burdens to God, you learn that you are not alone in your struggles. This awareness provides comfort and courage. Even in moments when circumstances remain unchanged, prayer reminds you that God is present, attentive, and actively involved in your life. This knowledge alone can sustain you through difficult seasons. Another powerful aspect of prayer as release is gratitude. When you thank God in the midst of uncertainty, you shift your focus from what is lacking to what is already provided. Gratitude reinforces trust and reminds you of past faithfulness. It anchors your faith in what God has already done, making it easier to believe for what he has yet to do. Over time, prayer as release changes how you approach life. You become quicker to surrender and slower to worry. You learn to respond to challenges with prayer rather than panic. This does not mean life becomes easy, but it becomes lighter. The weight you once carried alone is now shared with God, and that shared burden feels far less heavy. In the end, prayer is not about convincing God to act. It is about positioning your heart to receive what he is already doing. When you use prayer as a tool to release, you step into a rhythm of trust, peace, and dependence on God. You discover that letting go through prayer is not losing control. It is gaining freedom, strength, and the assurance that God is faithfully handling what you cannot. Trusting God's timing is one of the most challenging yet transformative aspects of faith. When you are waiting for change, for answers, or for breakthrough, time can feel like an enemy. Each passing day seems to magnify the problem, and silence can feel heavier than struggle. In these moments, impatience tempts you to rush ahead, to force outcomes, or to settle for something less than what God has promised. Yet trusting God's timing means believing that what feels like delay is often preparation happening beyond your sight. Human nature craves immediacy. We want quick solutions, fast relief, and visible progress. When God does not move according to our schedule, doubt begins to whisper that perhaps he is not listening or does not care. But God's timing is not governed by urgency. It is guided by purpose. He sees the entire picture, not just the moment you are living in. What feels slow to you may be perfectly timed in the grand design of his plan. Delay is often misunderstood as denial. When prayers seem unanswered, it is easy to assume the answer is no. However, many of the greatest breakthroughs occur after long seasons of waiting. Waiting refines faith. It reveals what you truly trust and where your hope is anchored. In the waiting, God often works on your character, strengthening patience, deepening dependence, and reshaping priorities. The work happening within you is just as important as the outcome you're waiting for. Trusting God's timing requires releasing comparison. Looking at others who seem to receive answers faster can create frustration and discouragement. You may wonder why their prayers are answered while yours remain pending, but God's plan for each person is unique. Your timeline is not behind, it is customized. Comparing your journey to someone else's only distracts you from the growth and preparation happening in your own life. Waiting also tests obedience. Sometimes God asks you to remain faithful even when there is no visible reward. Trusting his timing means continuing to do what is right, even when progress feels invisible. It means showing up, praying, believing, and hoping without knowing when or how things will change. This kind of faith is not passive. It is active endurance, rooted in confidence that God is faithful to his promises. One of the hardest parts of trusting God's timing is learning to rest in uncertainty. Unanswered questions can create anxiety, and the lack of clarity can feel unsettling. Yet rest comes not from knowing the future, but from trusting the one who holds it. When you trust God's timing, you choose peace over pressure. You stop trying to rush ahead and begin to live fully in the present moment, confident that God is guiding each step. Trusting God's timing also protects you from premature blessings. Sometimes what you desire is good, but receiving it too early could cause harm. God's delays often act as safeguards, preventing you from stepping into responsibilities or situations you are not yet prepared to handle. What feels like waiting may actually be God's mercy, ensuring that when the blessing arrives, you are ready to sustain it. Patience grows through experience. Each time you wait and see God come through, your trust deepens. You begin to recognize patterns of his faithfulness. You remember past moments when you thought the wait would never end, only to later see how perfectly everything aligned. These memories become anchors during new seasons of waiting, reminding you that God has never failed you before. Trusting God's timing does not mean ignoring your emotions. It is natural to feel frustrated, disappointed, or weary while waiting. Faith does not require suppressing these feelings. It requires bringing them honestly to God. In doing so, you find comfort and reassurance. God is not distant during the waiting season. He's close, attentive, and compassionate. As you learn to trust God's timing, your perspective shifts. You stop viewing waiting as wasted time and begin to see it as sacred space. It becomes a season where faith matures, hope strengthens, and reliance on God deepens. You realize that every moment is purposeful, even the ones filled with uncertainty. In the end, trusting God's timing is an act of surrender. It is choosing to believe that God knows what you need, when you need it, and how it should come. When you stop fighting the clock and start trusting the creator of time, peace replaces anxiety, Patience replaces frustration and hope remains alive. God's timing is never late, never early. It is always perf. ECT, even when it doesn't feel that way. Life's storms have a way of demanding your attention. When waves rise and winds grow stronger, fear naturally pulls your focus toward the chaos around you. Thoughts begin to race, questions multiply, and anxiety takes over. In those moments, what you focus on determines how you experience the storm. When your eyes stay fixed on the problem, the weight of it feels unbearable. But when your attention shifts to God, something changes inside you. The storm may still rage, but it no longer controls your heart. Focusing on the source rather than the storm is not denial, it is perspective. It means recognizing that while the situation is real, it is not ultimate. God's presence and power are greater than any challenge you face. When you allow circumstances to dominate your thoughts, fear gains authority. But when you intentionally focus on God, faith rises. This shift does not eliminate the storm, but it strengthens you to endure it. Storms often create a sense of urgency, pushing you to react quickly. Fear urges you to panic, to make decisions based on survival rather than trust. Focusing on God slows your heart and steadies your mind. It reminds you that you are not facing the storm alone. God's calm presence becomes an anchor, preventing you from being swept away by emotion or doubt. Keeping your focus on God requires intentionality. Distractions are everywhere, and fear is persistent. You may need to consciously redirect your thoughts, choosing to trust even when everything around you suggests otherwise. This is not easy, especially when the storm feels overwhelming. But focus is a discipline, not a feeling. Each time you choose to focus on God, you weaken fear's grip on your heart. When your focus shifts to God, your perspective changes. You begin to see the storm not as a threat, but as a test of trust. Instead of asking, how will I survive this? You start asking, what is God teaching me through this? This shift brings purpose to pain and meaning to struggle. The storm becomes a place of growth rather than defeat. Focusing on the source also affects how you speak. When fear dominates, your words often reflect worry and hopelessness. But when your eyes are on God, your words begin to carry faith. You speak with confidence, not because the situation is resolved, but because you trust the one who holds the solution. Your words reinforce your focus, strengthening your faith and calming your spirit. Another powerful result of focusing on God is peace. Peace does not come from the absence of storms, but from the presence of God within them. When your focus remains on Him, peace becomes possible even in chaos. This peace is not passive resignation, it is active trust. It allows you to move forward without being paralyzed by fear. Storms also reveal what you truly trust. When life is calm, it is easy to say you have faith. But when the waves rise, your focus shows where your trust lies. If your attention immediately goes to worst-case scenarios, it may indicate that fear has taken center stage. Redirecting your focus to God is a way of realigning your trust, reminding yourself that He is faithful even when circumstances are uncertain. Focusing on God does not mean ignoring practical steps. Faith and action work together. As you keep your eyes on God, He often provides wisdom and guidance for what to do next. Decisions made from a place of trust are usually wiser and more effective than those made from panic. God's guidance becomes clearer when fear no longer clouds your focus. Over time, learning to focus on God through storms builds spiritual resilience. Each storm you survive with your eyes fixed on Him strengthens your confidence for future challenges. You begin to realize that storms may come and go, but God remains constant. This realization transforms how you approach difficulties, replacing dread with determination and fear with faith. In the end, focusing on the source rather than the storm is a daily choice. Every day presents opportunities to either dwell on what is wrong or trust the one who is right. When you choose to fix your eyes on God, you are reminded that no storm is stronger than His presence, no wave is higher than His power, and no challenge is greater than His faithfulness. Even when the storm is loud, God's voice is steady, guiding you safely through to the other side. Letting go creates space for something greater to enter. When your hands are clenched tightly around control, expectations, and familiar solutions, there is little room for God to move in unexpected ways. Many people unknowingly limit God by confining Him to what they already understand. They ask for help, yet mentally restrict how that help can arrive. Letting go frees not only your heart, but also your imagination, allowing divine creativity to flow into situations that once felt stagnant and hopeless. Human thinking is often shaped by past experiences. If something has never worked before, we assume it never will. If we have tried every logical option and failed, we conclude that the situation is impossible. But God's creativity is not bound by history, logic, or probability. He creates paths where none exist and solutions that no one anticipates. When you let go of control, you stop insisting on familiar outcomes and allow God to work beyond your expectations. Divine creativity often operates outside comfort zones. God's solutions may not look like what you imagined or asked for. They can arrive through unexpected people, unconventional opportunities, or surprising circumstances. Letting go prepares your heart to recognize and receive these solutions. When you are too focused on one specific answer, you may overlook the miracle unfolding right in front of you. Letting go also shifts your mindset from limitation to possibility. Instead of asking, how can this be fixed? You begin to ask, what can God create from this? This change in perspective is powerful. It opens your heart to hope and renews your faith. Situations that once felt like dead ends become opportunities for transformation. God is not limited by brokenness. He specializes in creating beauty from it. Divine creativity is often revealed through process rather than instant change. When you release control, you may notice gradual shifts instead of dramatic breakthroughs. Small doors open, new ideas emerge, relationships begin to heal in unexpected ways. These subtle changes are often signs of God's creative work at play. Letting go helps you remain patient and attentive, recognizing that creativity takes time to fully unfold. Fear can block divine creativity. When fear dominates, you tend to choose safety over faith. You cling to what feels predictable, even if it no longer works. Letting go requires trust that God's ideas are better than your own. It asks you to step into uncertainty with confidence that God is guiding you. This trust allows creativity to flourish, both spiritually and practically. Letting go also invites personal growth. As God works creatively in your circumstances, He often works creatively in you. He reshapes your character, expands your vision, and challenges your assumptions. You begin to see life through a wider lens, recognizing that God's possibilities are far greater than your limitations. This inner transformation is often the foundation for external change. Another aspect of divine creativity is restoration. God does not simply patch broken things, He renews them. When you release control, you give Him permission to rebuild areas of your life in ways that are stronger and more beautiful than before. What you once saw as failure may become the foundation for a new beginning. God's creativity redeems what seems wasted. Letting go also removes pressure. When you believe that you must figure everything out, creativity feels forced. But when you trust God to lead, ideas and solutions flow more naturally. Peace creates space for insight. Stillness allows clarity. God often speaks most clearly when you stop striving and start trusting. Divine creativity extends beyond solutions. It redefines purpose. Sometimes God does not remove the problem immediately because He intends to use it to shape your calling. What you thought was an obstacle may become a platform for growth, service, or testimony. Letting go allows you to see your challenges through the lens of purpose rather than frustration. In the end, letting go frees you to experience God beyond your expectations. It allows Him to surprise you, to exceed your imagination, and to work in ways that bring deeper transformation. When you stop limiting God to what you understand, you step into a realm where the impossible becomes possible. Divine creativity flows most freely in hearts that are surrendered, open, and willing to trust that God's ways are always greater than their own. Surrender is not an ending. It is the doorway to breakthrough. Many people view surrender as loss, as though letting go means giving up hope or accepting defeat. In reality, surrender is the moment when struggle gives way to strength. It is the point where human effort reaches its limit and divine power takes over. Breakthrough rarely begins with control. It begins with release. When you surrender, you position yourself to receive what you could never achieve on your own. Surrender shifts responsibility from your shoulders to God's hands. As long as you believe everything depends on you, pressure will dominate your life. You will feel anxious, overwhelmed, and exhausted. But the moment you surrender, you acknowledge that God is in control, and that acknowledgement brings relief. It does not mean you stop caring or trying. It means you stop carrying what was never meant for you to bear. In surrender, the weight lifts and clarity begins to emerge. Breakthrough often comes after a long season of resistance. Many people hold on because they fear that surrender means nothing will change. Yet it is often the very act of letting go that allows change to happen. When you stop forcing outcomes, you make room for God's timing, wisdom, and power. Surrender breaks the cycle of frustration and opens the door for transformation. Surrender also brings alignment. When you release your own agenda, your heart becomes aligned with God's purpose. This alignment is powerful because it removes internal conflict. Instead of fighting against circumstances, you begin to flow with God's direction. Even when the path is challenging, there is peace in knowing that you are moving in alignment with His will. That peace is often a sign that breakthrough is near. One of the greatest breakthroughs surrender brings is inner transformation. External change is important, but internal change is foundational. When you surrender, God works on your heart, reshaping your mindset, refining your character, and strengthening your faith. This inner breakthrough prepares you to handle the external blessings that follow. Without inner growth, external success can become overwhelming or destructive. Surrender ensures that you are ready for what God is bringing. Surrender also strengthens trust. Each time you let go and see God come through, your confidence in Him deepens. You begin to recognize His faithfulness in new ways, even when breakthroughs are not immediate. Surrender builds a steady assurance that God is working behind the scenes. This trust becomes a source of stability, allowing you to remain hopeful even in uncertainty. Breakthrough through surrender often comes in unexpected forms. You may anticipate a dramatic change, but God may first bring peace, clarity, or direction. These internal shifts are breakthroughs in themselves. They change how you experience your circumstances and give you the strength to move forward. Over time, these inner breakthroughs often lead to visible change. Surrender also removes fear for the equation. Fear thrives on control and uncertainty. When you surrender, fear loses its power because you are no longer relying on your own ability to manage outcomes. You trust God to guide, protect, and provide. This trust creates courage, enabling you to take steps you once avoided. Fear no longer dictates your decisions. Faith does. Another powerful aspect of surrender is perseverance. When you stop fighting God's process, you gain endurance. You learn to wait without bitterness and to trust without anxiety. This perseverance is often what carries you through to breakthrough. Many breakthroughs are missed not because God is unwilling, but because people grow weary and give up before surrendering fully. Surrender also redefines success. Instead of measuring success by outcomes alone, you begin to value faithfulness and obedience. This shift brings freedom. You stop tying your worth to results and start resting in God's approval. This freedom allows you to move forward with confidence, knowing that your value is secure regardless of circumstances. In the end, surrender is the key that unlocks God's power in your life. It is the moment when striving ends and trust begins. Breakthrough flows not from force, but from faith. When you surrender fully, you open yourself to transformation that reaches deeper than circumstances and lasts longer than temporary solutions. What once seemed impossible becomes possible, not because you found the strength, but because you trusted the one who has it all. If this message spoke to your heart and stirred your faith, don't let it end here. Stay connected, stay encouraged, and stay growing. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a word that can strengthen your spirit and renew your hope. Share this message with someone who may be carrying a heavy burden or facing an impossible situation right now. You could be the reason their faith is reignited. Like this video to help spread the message, and let us know in the comments how God is working in your life. Keep believing, keep trusting, and remember, your breakthrough begins when you let go and let God.